Thank you. Hi, everyone on the phone. This is Department of Local Affairs. If you are both logged into your computer and also you in on this line, please mute one of them as we will hear feedback on the line here. I recommend, if you have done both, to mute your computer so that you can communicate onto the phone. It's also best if you would mute if you're not speaking, if you are on the phone. And then we're going to get started here in about 2 minutes. So I'm going to put you back on mute. Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
Hi there, we're going to go ahead and get started. If everyone on the phone line could please mute. Okay, thank you. Thank you for doing that. Stranger things happen. 222.
There's no more needs. Kathy, Jeannie's out, and
I don't know.
enjoy the holiday.
Yelling at them.
They're a little bit more of a sales.
Hi there, if you could all mute on the phone lines, that would be great. We're getting ready to get started here. So quiet. Conference call 101. Leave it open. We have to speak into the mic, otherwise it won't record for the call. Yeah. Good.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to 1313 Sherman. I'm Rick Garcia. I'm Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. This is the initial stakeholders meeting organized for those who are interested in the outcome of House Bill 1239, which was created this past legislative session, and the duties given to the Department of Local Affairs to implement the legislation. And the intent is, of course, to help ensure that the state completes full count in the 2020 census. So I suspect all of you in the room are interested in what that may mean to your local organization, your nonprofit, housing authority, local government, school districts, and items that were entities that were identified in the legislation. So thanks for being here. I wanted to be out to show off, and I just noticed that our esteemed newly elected chair of the Census Outreach Advisory Committee has joined us. I wanted to acknowledge and introduce Cecilia Estes, the 5-member advisory group that convened last week, heard the legislation to actually 4 appointed by the leadership of the House and the Senate, and 1 appointed by the Secretary of State. That group will support me and the NOAA staff, and that group will be making recommendations for the funding proposals that you'll hear about the details of that in this session. So thanks for being here, Cecilia. So with that, let me turn the program over, and there's an agenda, as you can see on the screen, to the Allison is going to be taking them. Okay. Allison is the financial assistance manager for this program, and I'll let you take it from here. Okay, and thank you for being here.
I don't know if anyone can see on the screen, but all of the folks on the webinar, we can't hear a thing. The voices are really garbled, and we can't hear anything.
So should we wait till that gets corrected?
Move that up to. Oh, okay.
We're going to move the speakers next to you all,
Okay.
and we'll see if Allison.
How's that, folks? Is that better? Can you hear me on the phone?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that, folks. My name's Allison Williams-Helm. I'm the Financial Assistance Manager here at the Division of Local Government. I'll be the face of the Census Grant Program here. So I was just going to go over the policies and procedures. There were copies of this in the back of the room. I'm not going to go over every single thing. We have a section for Q&A at 3 o'clock. So if you see something you want to ask a question about, maybe save it until then. So I'm looking at page 2 of the grant program purpose. So we were charged by the legislature to run this program, and it was created to provide grants to local governments, intergovernmental agencies, councils of government, housing authorities, school districts, and nonprofit organizations. Those are all eligible recipients, in order to support the accurate counting of the population of the state for the 2020 census. There's also, if you're interested, copies of the legislation in the back of the room, or you're also welcome to email me and I can connect you with all of that information if you want to dig in deeper. So eligibility is the next section on that page. As I just mentioned, eligible entities are local government, intergovernmental agencies, councils of government, housing authorities, school districts, nonprofit organizations, and specifically called out in the legislation was the Southern Ute Tribe and the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. So there's a note there about you must be in compliance with TABOR if you're a local government. Our intent, DOLA's intent in administering this program is outlined in the statute and is to provide a funding mechanism to ensure the information collected by the Census Bureau about our population and infrastructure is correct to the best of our ability. The most successful applications into the program are bulleted here below. So a description of how the eligible entity's current capacity for outreach and community engagement enables it to increase the self-response rates. A description of how the eligible recipient plans to use the grant money to increase the response rate and accuracy of the 2020 census. Whether the eligible recipient plans to use the grant money to further awards to other entities, that's subrecipients for you grant folks. Demonstrate organizational capacity to manage state dollars, and the same for subrecipients. Then page 3 is definitions, which you can look at on your own. I'm on to page 4, the application form. So we're going to run this notice of funds available, and the application process will be online at our website. We will be adding a link to the financial services portion of Census. I'm joined here on the right by my colleague. She's a deputy director here, Natrice Bryant. She's doing a little something different with Census, which she'll explain later on in the agenda. But there's 2 places or 3 places on the website about Census. This one is under financial assistance, under the Division of Local Government. So, okay, I'm skipping down to important dates. I'm still on page 4. The committee will announce applications for census outreach. In the legislation, it directs us to do this no later than August 15th. I think we may release them a little bit earlier than that. The applications will then be due to us by September 15th. And again, this is through the online grants portal. The executive director will announce grant awards no later than November 1st, and we're hoping to get the money out pretty quickly to folks after that. Any money that's not spent by June 30th of 2020 must be returned to DOLA. That's what's in the little box there. So the application review, our executive director alluded to that a little bit. We're being helped in this process by a committee appointed by the legislature. So DOLA staff will initially score all applications internally, and we will present them to the committee for their recommendations to our executive director. And then there's a little bit of information there about how the advisory committee was put together. That's also available in the legislation. I'm looking at page 5 now. This is a rubric about rating criteria for applications. So we have at the top, capacity is worth 10 points. The applicant articulates the capacity for outreach and community engagement that enables them to increase the self-response rate in hard-to-count communities. The second one is subrecipients for 10 points. If you don't intend to utilize subrecipients, you will get an automatic 10 points, so don't worry about that. So that was program scoring, and then the second section of this rubric is committee score. So 30 points are available for outreach to hard-to-count communities in the state. 30 points are available for size and geographic area and demographic diversity, and then 20 points toward a specific community as identified in the legislation. And those are in the box to the right there, including children under 5 years of age, racial and ethnic minorities, communities of color, American Indians, people with disabilities, people with low incomes, immigrants, people who speak and understand limited amounts of English, people living in rural areas of the state, and people without sufficient internet access. Okay, I'm on to page 7, which is funding decisions. A letter from DOLA's executive director announcing a decision to provide project funding is not a formal obligation by the state, but rather an offer to enter into a grant contract for the dollar amount and project specified. So we will send award letters, but it's really the contracting process that engages you as a grantee if you're selected. The grant award is valid for 7 months. This is very important because the census is coming up quickly, and so folks who apply for this award really need to be ready to hit the ground running. This is not a capacity building grant. This is for people who already have the ability to take the money and run. So applications will be notified of award decisions via letter, which I mentioned. Award notifications will be made prior to November 1st. And then the section there on the bottom is about reporting. We will be advancing the money for this program, and so we are trusting that folks will go out and do the work and spend the money, and then after, they will report to us. Because we have a year following the end of spending the money to actually put together our internal report to the legislature. So there's some information there about that. Each grantee recipient shall submit an initial report and supporting documentation by December 1st of 2020. And on or before May 1st of 2021, a final report of eligible expenditures. So there's that section there on the bottom of 7. Now I think we can just keep going past this because this is still reporting on page 8. And then on page 9 is an example of what we think the application will look like. So pretty standard stuff: applicant details, eligible applicant type, full name of organization, the person who will take responsibility for the grant, the project description. You'll attach a budget, describe your capacity, the use of funds, and then there's an area for subrecipients, and then the area you're going to cover geographically. And then section C on the bottom of page 10 is for local governments. That's related to TABOR, permission to not exceed TABOR. And then section D on page 11 is for nonprofits only. And there we're asking nonprofits to upload copies of either the IRS determination letter for formation, confirmation of good standing with the Secretary of State, and or a Form 990. And then if you're not able to get these, you can just explain why in your application. And that's it for me for policies and procedures. Up next is my colleague Rachel, who's in the back of the room. She's coming up right now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Sharp. I'm the Director for Division of Local Government. And our team includes a lot of various financial assistance programs, and this one is assigned to our team, that's Allison and the piece I'm going to talk to you about today is kind of the process. And again, we'll have questions at the end. But as Allison talked about, we have a committee whose role is established in statute, and they're assigned to do three things. They are assigned to help our executive director specifically make recommendations on policies and procedures, which they did. That's how we have them here today for you. Closer like this? Okay. Sorry on the phone, I'm trying to improve my speaking here and moving you closer to me. The second role of the committee is to review grant applications. And the third is to make recommendations to our executive director, Rick, which applications to approve for a grant and which to award. So that's really their role within the statute. Cecilia Espinosa is our chairperson. She is here today as well, and we're very fortunate to have them. They were appointed via statute based on recommendations from the Speaker of the House Minority Leader, the Senate Minority Leader, the Senate President, and then the Secretary of State. So those are all appointments. Okay. Allison did talk a bit about the timeline already, but I just want to go back over it again. We had our first meeting of the committee last week, and they turned around recommendations to us very quickly about the policies and procedures, and that's how we're able to have this meeting today. So we really appreciate their time and the amount of effort they put into being ready to do the work to help make sure this money gets out to you all. We hope to have our release of the actual online application up next week. And to do that, we need to make sure that our systems are running, but the committee in statute has to make an actual formal announcement of the notice being available to you all by the 15th of August. So that's our drop dead date. We want to get the application up sooner so that you have time to look at it. As Allison pointed out, we already have a copy of what it will ask you in the policies and procedures, so you'll know what to start researching so that you can answer those questions before you get into the online portal. I really do recommend that you start drafting that up before you get into the portal and start writing out your answers in Word or something so that you can copy and paste them in. August 15th, like I said, the notice of the application must be announced by the committee, and then on September 15th, all applications will be due. We will shut down the application online at either midnight that day or close of business. Usually it's midnight. And that gives everybody the entire day to complete their application submittals. The last week of September, the week of September 23rd, is when the committee is anticipated to meet again. Like I said before, their role is to make a recommendation to our executive director around grants to award. They'll use that rating criteria that Allison covered in the policies and procedures to help score applications and come to the meeting ready to make decisions together. So we should have answers fairly quickly as to whom will be awarded or not. All of those recommendations will be given to our executive director, who will make final awards. All of the awards will start November 1. They have to be announced by our executive director on that day. And then we have to complete a fund transfer. That's an advance to all of you to do the work. And we have to do that within 30 days. So the statute was pretty clear on the expectations we have. So that's why some of the rigor on the application side, to make sure that, as Allison pointed out earlier, you're ready to work, you're ready to roll. These are really not capacity building grants. They are ready to go kind of grants. Then we have until June 30th to spend all of the funding. All of our grant contracts will be written individually based on the applicants and the type of organization you're in. We will have different requirements for different organizations just based on the types of organizations you are. For example, if you're a local government, we'll have different requirements than we would for a nonprofit. We'll have more monitoring, perhaps, if you're a newer nonprofit. We may have fewer monitoring because we work with you already in another program. All of those reflect a one-on-one that we want to make sure we have with you, and ensuring that your grant is actually successful, because we want to see all of our grants to be successful. By the end of December, or December 1, we have to ask all of you to submit a final report. We actually want to see them sooner than that, if we can, so that you don't have more reporting straggling on after you don't have funding. So we know that it's hard to do administrative work without the funds, so we want to help get that work done as soon as possible. Now that covers my piece, and I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague Natrice Bryant, and we're going to move the phone, so hold please.
Okay, everyone on the phone, I'm speaking as close to the phone as I possibly can, and I'll lean forward so you guys can hear me a little bit better. My name's Natrice Bryant. I'm the Deputy Director for the Department of Local Affairs, and I also have the pleasure of serving as the State Complete Count Campaign's Chair for the state of Colorado. I wanted to give you guys some information about activities that are already going on. I know a lot of you probably have an idea of what you'd like to do for outreach, but this informational session is really to give you updated information as to what the state is currently doing. We also have some representatives from local government that are here that are also doing outreach work already. And so this is really a federal, state, local government, local community partnership. This isn't something that we want messaging kind of tailoring all over. We recognize that there are specific messages that settle well with other individuals, and so we have some guidance that we'd like to give to you today. I encourage you all to pick up the 2 sheets in the back of the room. The first one that looks has the Department of Local Affairs logo, as well as the State Complete Count Campaign's logo on there as well. These are some tidbits that I encourage you to look at and utilize, but I'm going to go through them bullet by bullet so you understand where we're talking. And then the second one is a piece of paper that also has our Everyone Counts logo from the Census 2020 State Complete Count Campaign, and that is those are bullet points that talk more about recommendations from the U.S. Census Bureau on activities that they encourage. So I encourage you guys to also look at those documents as well. I see a lot of people getting up to get the documents, so I'll go slowly as you get the information. I know additional copies are being made, so if we need more, Chantal is holding up her hand, and she's happy to hand out information to you while you're in the room. The first piece of information that I'd like to cover is that the Census Bureau, as well as the Department of Local Affairs, as well as many local governments, have worked together to develop material already. We have things that are translated in several different languages. you will see the website. This information will be available online as well, so you can click on that information. There are things that have already been developed, as in what is Census 101, talking about the types of ways in which people can respond to the census, talking about some of the different things that we've come up with. We've been operating the State Complete Count campaign since December of 2018. So we had the opportunity to work with some of you as well as some local communities to develop messaging that really resonates well with people in Colorado. That's how we came up with Everyone Counts in Colorado. You'll see the logo at the top, but it's also in partnership with the U.S. Census Bureau. They've got people on the ground in all of your communities working on different messaging, translating documents into Spanish, Chinese. We also are looking at having some Burmese interpretation. There are 13 languages that the census will be provided in, and we recognize that that does not cover nearly all the languages in Colorado. But we also have additional materials that have been created in additional 100 languages, so you will be able to get that information. We encourage you to utilize this website to get as much information as possible. You will see two bullets. There's a census website, which has all of the U.S. Census Bureau's information. A lot of that information is translated already into different languages. And then you also see the DOLA website. That website is what we will be utilizing to put Colorado messaging specific up. You'll also find information on there about one-pagers that have already been created. If there's information online that you think would be useful for your campaigns, ask us for the editable files. It's easy for us to send those over to you. You can take your logo and add it to that document. We encourage co-branding. The message that we really want to push across the state so that everyone understands is that this is important, it's easy, and it's safe. And so there has been a lot of conversation about what that means. And so that is what your State Complete Count campaign is really working on, is to make sure that that important, easy, and safe messaging is received well across the state. As you know, there's been the discussion upon many different types of things, how many questions are on the census, what types of questions are on the census. We have those documents created for you. Please utilize them from our website because they're already created. We've vetted them through the federal government. We've vetted them through our local communities, and the messaging resonates well with certain groups, but you're also welcome to reach out to us if you have questions. Scrolling down to the third bullet point, I talked a little bit about some recommendations from the census, which you guys can absolutely look through and read, and I'll go back to that in a moment. The outreach and education for census is coordinated through local complete count committees as well. We have a list of local complete count committees that have already been formed across the state. Again, going back to the DOLA website, we have those contacts listed online. Please reach out to those individuals because there might be efforts going on in your local communities that you were not aware of. And if you're planning on doing outreach in a certain community and there's already a local complete count committee formed, they may be able to help you out with the work. So do as much research as you possibly can when you're submitting your applications. In addition, the State Complete Count Committee has also developed several subcommittees. We have 8 of them. If you'll flip to the back of the page that has both logos, the DOLA logo as well as the State Complete Count Committee logo, you will find a list of those subcommittees, and I'll talk a little bit about what they're doing. How we formed these subcommittees is very specific on the needs that we received from the community. We heard people when they said there's concerns about what types of questions are being asked on the census. We also developed our fact sheets based on the information that we received from local community members. So we'll talk a little bit about those subcommittees. The first one is the Communication, Media, and Outreach Subcommittee. They're working on translation of documents. One thing that I will tell you that's resonated well is how that information relates to individual people. For us to push the messaging that says $883 billion comes annually to the United States, 13 billion of that comes to Colorado, great. How does that resonate with me as an individual? So we talk about per count per head. We talk about how those dollars are impacted. There's 55 programs that are impacted across the state. Those stories really tell well how that $13 billion represents the communities at hand. It's your educational programs. It's your healthcare programs. It's also looking at tiered funding for your schools. Not all of us have children, but we know somebody who has a child. Those types of stories resonate well. So when you're thinking about your outreach, think deeper than just the $13 billion. Think about how you tell the story to community members in the hard to count communities that Allison listed earlier, because that's really how you're going to get an increase in self-response rate. You will see some dates on there that Allison and Rachel talked about. Please pay attention to those because those are also very important, and we encourage you to look at those. The second committee that we have, the subcommittee, is the Rural Committee. As you'll recognize, not everybody's located in the Front Range. So we know that rural Colorado has different needs than people that live in Denver. So recognizing that is there and recognizing that rural Colorado and rural communities has been defined as a hard to count community, think about those. The rural community is looking at low income individuals, they're looking at a homeless population, they're looking at all the different facets of the community that are represented. Some communities will tell us that they don't have a homeless problem, and there's definitely a push that they absolutely might. So rural Colorado looks at all the different facets of how they are getting information. If you're a local government, please utilize your regional managers because they will know where the huge issues are and they can help with those applications and give you technical guidance. In addition, we have the Education and Youth Subcommittee. The reason that was formed is because under 5 is hard to count. It is not that we forget that we have children. It is that we have a lot of split households where mom might think that dad filled out the census for little Bobby and vice versa, and nobody counts the child. So there's different ways that we can reach them. I'll talk a little bit about what type of activities are going on in the schools, so you can kind of think through how you could potentially partner. The other one is higher education. Higher education and our colleges, community colleges, are also counted in what's called group quarters. And that's a concept that people are kind of like, well, how do we count the prisons and the jails? All of those individuals are counted in group quarters in addition to people who are a part of the higher education program. But there's still a need to reach those groups to understand that they do count in Colorado. Again, we push the messaging, important, easy, and safe. The other group is the Business and Nonprofit Subcommittee. They have been working with all of, probably most of you in this room, as well as getting information out to the businesses. We will also be providing information to the businesses through the Secretary of State's office. So just keeping in mind that businesses have employees, those employees are also people that we want to have fill out the census. Immigrant, refugee, and communities of color is a subcommittee. We broke that down because we recognize that there are different needs and different conversations that need to be had with those communities. We have an immigrant, refugee, and community of color subcommittee that focuses specifically on the needs of those particular groups. We have their action plans kind of put together. We have a State Complete Count campaign meeting the second Tuesday of every other month. You all are welcome to come to that meeting if you'd like to know more about what's happening. But we have identified some messaging that works well for each community defined in that subcommittee, and also how we tell the story with that particular group of individuals. We also have the policy subcommittee, which is the group that worked on the bill that got this money. So that's the group that's been working on policy initiatives to ensure that Colorado is able to receive a complete count. And then finally, you have your local and state government. Again, we do as much outreach as we possibly can to our employees, but there's also additional methodologies that we can utilize to get messaging that talks to local governments specifically to say, here's how the money impacts your community as a whole. So those are the 8 subcommittees that we formed. Underneath that, you will see a list of ideas. This is not an end-all, be-all list. These are activities that I just want you to be aware of. A couple that I'll point out. The Education and Youth Subcommittee specifically is looking to work with the Census Bureau as a whole, and Dustin Singer, who works for the Census Bureau, has been working on census in the schools. We want to make sure that information goes from the kids to the parent and vice versa. We know that in some communities, kids are how the information gets to the parent. And so we'll be having information in back to school folders. We'll be having things in Friday folders for the younger kids. So that messaging is constantly going to be received by the parent through the child. And we will have some of those things interpreted in different languages so that messaging is consistent. You'll also see that we will have a portal that potentially links on certain school districts' web pages to census information so we can drive that messaging. We're also working with some of the senior organizations as well to make sure that the communities of 65 and older are counted. And you'll also see assistance centers that are set up in your local libraries. We know that libraries are a trusted source, and so local libraries are a place where people who might have internet connectivity or may not want to fill out the census in their own home are able to go to those assistance centers in the libraries. Thinking of those ideas are what we really encourage you all to do before you put your application together. These are just a list of things that you could potentially do and utilize, but these are things that are also going on in your local communities. So please utilize our website as a resource to get that information, to see what's actually happening and how you might be able to partner better. The last piece of information that I just want to bring your eye to is the last handout that I talked about, which is, it says Census 2020, what partners should and should not do to support census self-response. This comes directly from the Census Bureau, so I encourage you all to take a look at this and read through this while you're putting your applications together. Again, this is from the federal government. We've just redesigned it with a state logo to put it in Colorado terms, but this is information from the Census Bureau that I encourage you all to look over prior to putting your applications together. And now I will turn it over to Allison. Back to you.
So we really whipped through that quickly. We don't have anything else on the agenda except questions, if folks want to ask some questions at this point. Go ahead.
I have a question.
I'll just repeat it back for the people on the phone, okay?
So I'm a teacher in Denver Public Schools, but I'm also chair of the DPS Asian Education Advisory Council. So we work really, really intensely with the Asian community. Is it better for like Denver Public Schools to apply for a grant and then have all the subcommunity students, or does it matter if a break off from DPS applies for a grant?
So people on the phone, the question was, there's a woman in the audience who works for DPS but also has a connection to the Asian community. And so her question, I think, is about subrecipients, about is it better for DPS to apply and then sub it out to groups that work specifically with ethnic communities? Is that okay? I would say yes. It would be better to have DPS apply and then sub it out, yeah. Go ahead.
Has the question been answered concerning the church, especially in my community? The Black church is probably one of the greatest places to really work this program. Have you considered that question about separation of church and state?
Yes, we have. So for people on the phone, I don't know if you heard the question, but it was, are you asking if churches are eligible to apply?
Yes.
Okay. Did you want to take that?
Okay. You got it.
So churches are not called out in the legislation. The way that we've thought about handling this is to have churches partner, as Natrice mentioned, or as this woman who asked the first question mentioned, with other organizations and then be a sub-grantee. Because unless you have nonprofit status, you would not be eligible.
Are you accepting entities that use the fiscal sponsor to be the primary applicant?
So the question for people on the phone was about fiscal sponsor. We don't have that in our policies and procedures. It would be better well, in regard to what I said before about you need to be ready to go on this. So if you need a fiscal sponsor, you're probably not ready to go. It would be better if you were a subrecipient to someone who is ready to go. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
To be clear, on August 15th is when we'll know how much funding each side is eligible to apply for and what falls under the budget.
So the question was how much money is available for the program, and
to apply for, so that we can tailor our budget accordingly.
So we don't. The question was how much each. What do you mean by site?
Well, each applicant.
Okay, so each applicant, is there a threshold of what you can apply to? No, we had not set those parameters. So.
Will that be in August 15th or not?
So, as we mentioned earlier, we're releasing the NOFA and the application hopefully by the end of next week. So that specific question is not addressed because we aren't limiting people. I mean, in theory, you could apply for all $6 million. Would you be awarded? Probably not. Go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about the delegation of between the committee and the department of deciding who gets grants?
So the question was, how is the work split between internal DOLA staff and the committee that's advising us?
Design.
Okay.
Decision.
You want to take that? Okay. So the way that it will work is, because we're using our portal for accepting the applications, internal staff will do initial eligibility for who can actually apply for this. Then we will score using the rubric that's attached in the policies and procedures. Then we will come up with all the people who are eligible and have the highest score and present them to the committee for them to advise us.
And then does the committee need to make a unanimous decision, or is it just majority?
They will make a recommendation to the executive director, but the final decision rests with Rick Garcia, our executive director.
Can they make a recommendation based on a majority, or does it need to be unanimous?
I don't think we've gotten there.
This is Rachel. The question was, how will the committee make their recommendation? And the committee will go through and score. They will review them based on an aggregate scoring. They've already agreed to do that. In many of our committees, the aggregate scoring of the committee is utilized as a recommendation to the executive director. That is the top scores and going from the top down. Others have done dollar limits. It really does depend on what the applications look like, what the requests are, and it would be premature for us to tell you what the committee would recommend, other than what we've seen in other programs, which is that they use those scoring criteria to help them guide a recommendation to the executive director. But ultimately, the executive director makes the final funding decisions.
Go ahead, go back.
On the subcommittee, communication, media, and outreach, how does it tie in? I mean, how does a media entity, how do they partner?
Do you want to take that one?
For people on the phone, the question was, through the subcommittees that are listed on the back of the form that we talked about in the eligible activities, how do they partner? So to answer your question, sir, the way in which the media can partner, the subcommittee is not specific to media. It's a way in which we can utilize the media to do outreach. For example, we can reach out to a news station from the State Complete Count campaign to get messaging out to that particular entity. We know that there's certain groups and certain media outlets that target certain populations. That's how the media subcommittee really works, on how we tell the story of what Colorado is doing for individuals. So that's how the subcommittee works. It's not through the grant process. This is specific to how the State Complete Count campaign is utilizing media to do outreach. So there's not anyone from the media that currently sits on our committee. There's 36 members, and they all represent different facets of government, nonprofits, local communities, but media communication and outreach is a piece of the material and the messaging that we know we'll have to utilize.
Go ahead.
Will the committee be hearing all applications, or only the ones that DOLA has as well?
Only eligible organizations will be passed on to the committee.
But the ones that have been scored, regardless of scoring, does the committee see all of them, or only?
No, only the eligible organizations. So for folks on the phone, he was asking if the committee sees all of the applications, and the answer is no. Only those that are eligible.
They'll get a list. They'll get a list on eligible.
So Rachel just reminded me that we'll be sharing a list of the names of organizations that weren't eligible, but it's time consuming to review all these applications. You guys are grants people, you know that. So really we're interested in the ones who are eligible and might actually get an award. So they will have the names of them, yes, but they probably will not see the application.
Has the committee or the staff determined any priority of the 12 hard-to-count populations that are listed here?
No. So for folks on the phone, the question was, do we have a priority area of communities that we're focusing on? And the answer is no. We're hoping to best select grantees to represent the entire state. Oh, go ahead.
Back to the earlier question on funding, is it possible that someone, an entity may ask for, say, $50,000 in money, but then based on the quality and number of applicants, maybe we're given 40 or 20 or some smaller amount? Yes.
Sure. So the question for people on the phone is if an applicant asked for $50,000 and in the course of reviewing applications, it was determined that the quality of the application wasn't so great or that the funding need of other organizations was greater. Is that fair? Yes, we would certainly consider that. Just because you ask for $50,000 doesn't mean that's what you'll be awarded. Yeah, that's a great question.
Are 501c4s eligible?
My friend from the nonprofit organization, what is 501c4?
Social welfare organization. I think it's in the legislation.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll double check that.
But it says it in results.
So it says they're eligible in the bill, 501c4s are eligible organizations. Okay. Okay, so we'll just take some questions from the phone.
Are institutions of higher education, colleges, universities eligible to apply for a grant?
So are universities and colleges eligible to apply? The answer is yes.
I have a follow-up question about the one about the fiscal sponsorship. We operate under a fiscal agent, the Colorado Nonprofit Development Center, so it's like not an ad hoc relationship, but a permanent relationship. Would we be eligible to apply?
I'm wondering how long you've been under them.
Since we were formed, 4 years.
How long? 4 years. Okay. I think that's something we could consider. We hadn't discussed that exactly, but I don't understand why you don't have your own 501c3 at this point after 4 years.
Well, let me just say that the Colorado Nonprofit Development Center houses about 80 different nonprofit projects around the state.
Yes, I'm familiar with their work. Yep.
And some people have been there 20 years, so it just depends.
Well, certainly you can put in an application, yes.
Thank you.
In the example given, what's better for DPS to apply?
So the question was, in the example, the first question was, why would it be better for DPS to apply? Maybe I'm making an assumption here, but it seems like DPS maybe have the capacity to actually have a grant writer to apply to the application, and they would be able to manage financially state dollars in order to conduct the work of the grant.
Does length of CCC, volunteer time, or matching funds impact your application positively?
Say it again.
Does length of CCC, volunteer time, or matching funds impact your application positively?
So for the person who wrote in about CCC, I'm not familiar with that term.
It's count committee.
Oh,
Census committee.
do you want to answer that?
I can answer that.
I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about.
For the individual who wrote the question was if volunteer time for the CCC, being the complete count committee, counts positively towards the application. So we knew that individuals from the state complete count committee and also local complete count committees could potentially apply. That's not in the scoring rubric. What we're really looking for is their ability to be able to reach those hard to count populations. So to answer your question, you wouldn't get extra points because you serve on the committee.
And there was a follow-up question about that with match dollars. Was that right, Naomi?
No.
Okay. Okay. Because we're not requiring anyone to provide match for folks on the phone.
Will the committee get to see all grant applications or just a subset?
We already answered that one. Oh, she just wrote in. So we have another question about, will the committee see all the applications? We answered that a few minutes ago. They'll see a list of organizations that were determined not eligible, but they will not see those applications.
Can you give us examples of eligible expenses for these grant funds?
Sure. legislation allows administrative costs. It also allows administrative costs for sub-recipients. It allows for the funding of outreach activities, and that could include marketing organizations. It could include distribution of information. It could include rental of a space at a public event so that you could be there to distribute information. It really is intended, and it's very broadly written as to what exactly you could do, and that's intentional so that you could be as creative as possible to help bring in to the census as many counted as possible.
If a county complete count committee includes local governments and nonprofits, should each entity apply for their own funds? Or should the overreaching committee apply and then disperse funds to committee partners?
So there's going to be a couple of us that cover this question. The question was if local complete count committees can apply, and then, can you read that for me again, Naomi?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so if a county complete count committee includes local governments and nonprofits, should each entity apply for their own funds, or should the overreaching committee apply and then disperse funds to committee partners?
So the question is, if local complete count committees have nonprofits, local governments and such on their complete count committee, should they apply, or should each individual entity apply? That's a decision that each local community would have to make as far as how that application goes forward. Allison covered that a little bit when the question was asked about Denver Public Schools. We want to make sure that there's capacity to be able to put forth the activities. And if you have nonprofits on your local complete count committee, and I know there's a couple of them that have discussed whether or not they should submit as a county or if they should submit as individual entities, that's the conversation that you all need to have with your local groups to figure out what makes the most competitive application. It's not as though we're going to say, because you applied as a local government with multiple entities and you're a local complete count committee, that you're going to guarantee to get the funds because you formed this. It's really about capacity building. And yes, we appreciate that local complete count committees have been formed and that they include nonprofits, but that's a conversation that we encourage you all to have with your groups to make sure that the best application comes through for the outreach that you're trying to do.
I would just tag on to what Natrice said and say we would look favorably upon partnerships because of what we said about capacity building and also about covering the entire state. It's important for you to know as an applicant what other people in your community are doing around this work. And if you could work with them, better, even better.
Are 501c6 organizations eligible?
No, statute says C3, C4.
What was that one, Amy? So I can repeat it for the phone.
Are 501c6 organizations?
The question was, are 501c6 organizations eligible? And the answer is no. The only ones called out in the legislation are 501c3 or 501c4. That's it.
Can you please talk more about how to work with a partner? I know it is in the documentation.
I didn't hear any of that.
We're going to repeat it for the phone. And if you're not asking the question, can you please mute yourself on the phone so that everyone can hear the questions that are being asked?
Just going to give examples of partnership opportunities that could be applied for and that we've seen in the past. So we've seen councils of governments apply for grants and then distribute funds amongst their participating local governments for different activities. So that's one kind of partnership activity that could take place. You could also have a sponsoring one county apply, and then all of the local governments within or the nonprofits within, along with that county applies. The county itself could apply for 1.5 million and distribute it within the county to nonprofits, to subrecipients and local governments. That's another opportunity out there. As far as nonprofit partnerships, there could be an overarching nonprofit organization that is a 501c3 or 4 that also applies and then makes distribution to subrecipients. Those are the kinds of partnerships that we've seen and have been successful. It is easier to administer a grant when you have one primary grant applicant who is then doing subrecipient work, because then that one grant recipient can report on behalf of all of the subrecipients. That's the reason those are often looked at more favorably.
Are nonprofits eligible for a grant PSA education spot?
Media is not eligible.
So the question was, for people on the phone, tell me again, Naomi, are folks able to apply to produce PSAs, public service announcements? The answer is no, it's not specified in the legislation.
Well, they could. I'm sorry, I thought I thought the question was whether the news agency could apply, and news agencies. Media nonprofits are, yes, are media nonprofits eligible, yes, but we would want to know more around what the PSA is and want to be a part of ensuring that it meets what we know Census has agreed as the way they prefer those announcements to be publicized.
Can we take any portion of the grant for admin?
Yes.
No. So the question was, can we take a portion of the grant for administrative costs? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
Can you talk about the maximum amount a grantee can potentially receive?
$1 million.
We discussed this earlier. The pot available is $6 million. In theory, you could apply for the entire $6 million, but you probably will not be awarded that. We don't have a cap necessarily on the top grant amount. But as we've already stated as well, we want to cover the entire state of Colorado. So,
including a piece about equity, diversity, and inclusion is largely seen as a grant-making best practice. Will the application about equity or cultural competency? If not, is it possible that all the money could go to white-led or white-serving organizations?
No. You want to repeat that question? I think the question was around equity and the distribution of funds and weighting based on the communication out to hard-to-count communities. And the committee in particular was very concerned with making sure that there is a score added to the criteria which evaluates whether or not the applicant is actually able to reach the hard-to-count communities identified in the statute. So the reflection of the committee will be on addressing those hard-to-count communities.
I just have one last question. It's about the September 15th date. That's on a Sunday.
Yeah.
That's the best choice for the
So the question was about the deadline for turning in applications is September 15th, which the person on the phone brought to our attention is on a Sunday, and their question was, is that the best date? And the answer is yes, that is.
So you mentioned that there will not be prioritization of different hard-to-count communities. So with that equity question in mind, then is there some type of mechanism in place to make sure that there is equal distribution, or at least forward to the hard-to-count communities, the different ones that are receiving funding for outreach?
No. Do you want to take that? The question was if there is a floor distribution of equity across the applications to ensure that there's fair distribution amongst the hard-to-counts. Is that fair? Is that the summary? I don't know, and we can't respond to what actually we will receive. as far as the applications are concerned. But as I said before, the committee is very concerned with making sure that there is a reflection in the application of the hard-to-count communities as identified in the statute.
Is there a cap on the administrative costs for the grant, to the grantee?
So the question was, is there a cap on the administrative costs? And the answer would be no, but as nonprofit people, there's a certain threshold, under 10% typically for administrative costs. I would use that maybe as a ruler.
The question is, what is the deadline time on September 15th?
Midnight.
So the question was, when on September 15th is the application due? Typically it's midnight. The portal will let you in and submit your application until midnight, and then it will cut you off.
I have different parts for my question. One is, on your list of ideas, do you have ideas that you can provide us to use, or can we make up our own? For example, CSA. Do you have
The question in the room was on the back of the form where we have a list of ideas. Can you guys use your own type of outreach or have to follow that list? This is just a recommendation. It provides guidance for things that we know are currently going on. You are absolutely welcome to utilize your own ideas for the outreach.
which means board messaging? We can create our board messaging.
The question is, you create your own billboard messaging? You can, yes. It's just these are ideas and suggestions for individuals who may not know what's already going on across the state.
Okay. Recipient.
So the question for people on the phone was, do subrecipients have to be 501c3s? And the answer would be yes. And this, as subrecipient, would be the appropriate place to apply if you are needing a fiscal sponsor.
Yeah, just defined also.
In the first part.
Sure, go ahead.
The purpose of this is outreach education to hard-to-count communities to increase the self-response rate and accuracy. How do we know that we can actually achieve that?
Great question. So the question was, the intention is to increase the hard-to-count. How do we as grantees know that we've done that? And our state demographer is here. She actually will be on the looking back in time, evaluating whether or not we've changed our hard-to-count numbers, but that won't be something we would wait onto you as an actual grantee. We as a state would be evaluating that, looking back on the grant program. But we definitely want to know how and what your community looks like that you're going to be reaching out to and what your efforts are intended to address. So, Elizabeth, do you want to add anything to that?
Actually, you hit the piece right there.
Will there be an addendum with the Q&A added to the portal or available for those that missed today's meeting or maybe missed some of the questions in the end?
You can have the Q&A on the website, sure.
So there was a question in the room about, will we be putting up Q&A on the website? And we can definitely do that. We're making a recording of this call right now for people who are online. And of course, folks are always welcome to contact me directly.
Could you describe subrecipient a little bit more? I'm curious about things like stipends or is there like a threshold that you would assign somebody as a subrecipient versus supporting a
Sure. The question was about subrecipient. Do we have a better definition of that? And what about scenarios where folks will be paying stipends to their?
or an honorarium for to an organization for allowing you to use their space, and not for sending staff to a meeting as opposed to executing work on your behalf.
Okay. So I'll just point you to page 3. We have a list of definitions, and one of them is subrecipient. It says subrecipient means to further award grant money to other local governments, intergovernmental agencies, councils of government, housing authorities, school districts, or nonprofit organizations. But in regard to your specific question, I think if you have a good justification for why you would need to pay an honorarium for space or stipends to people who are helping in this effort, as long as you have a good justification, certainly we would consider it. Go ahead.
So stipends are allowed?
If you have a good justification, sure, write it in there.
They're not disallowed.
We would look at the entire administrative cost and the total amount of grant that you're requesting, and then evaluate whether or not it's reasonable for we would just term that as an administrative overhead cost. And then we would evaluate whether or not that's reasonable based on the amount of funds that you're granted. And then this, as far as the second layer of, is a stipend appropriate, we would have to evaluate what it is for and to whom, and so those would be an individual conversation with each of the grantees.
So we have one more question in the room. Go ahead.
So Allison, you said we could contact you
Yes.
on various points.
Yes.
The question is, are you going to have something on the portal or on the
So
website?
my contact information is on the website, but I was also thinking maybe Naomi could just pull it up maybe and show them my email address and phone number. I'm also happy to tell you, folks, my direct dial is 303-864-7897, and my email is my name, Allison, ALISON, .Williams, WILLIAMS, .Helm, @states.co.us. And for people on the phone, Helm is like a ship, HELM as in Mary. Okay, perfect. Do you want to? Sure, yeah.
Given the public anti-immigrant political positions of some members of the Oversight Committee, helping groups who seek funding for outreach to immigrant groups expect a fair shot at funding.
The question was how, based on the backgrounds of individuals on the committee, there was concern around fairness of awards and consideration of grant applications. The committee is a very esteemed group of individuals, and the executive director of DOLA makes the final funding decision. So any application that is eligible will not only get to the committee, but it will also get to our executive director, who makes the final funding decisions.
That was it. Any other questions in the room? All right. Well, thank you, folks. I can hang around after for a little bit if you want to speak to me individually.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you on the phone.
Appreciate it.